All right, back on the Young Turks. Now time to talk about what we've learned from the Iraq War as David Broder tries to push us into the Iran War. Well, it turns out a lot of civilians died, and part of the reason we know that is Wikileaks just had this huge number of documents that they have released that we found out a lot of information from. The Guardian has put together a couple of videos that explain some of that information. We have a guest from The Guardian. First, I wanted to play just a small part of one of those videos so you get a sense of it. Let's watch that.
There was also evidence of bruises on the face, chest, ankle, and back of the body.
He was beaten from the 3rd day to the 7th day of his capture. Report states the Iraqi forces beat him with cables and water pipes.
Large amounts of blood on the cell floor, a wire used for electric shock, and a rubber hose.
The detainee's body showed extensive bruising around the shoulders, arms, and lower extremities.
Pussy on the forehead of a prisoner who was crying.
Detainee's back shows what appears to be a boot print, outlined in bruised tissue.
Reasonable suspicion of abuse. Outcome, no further investigation.
Finally, the evidence. For years, the Iraqi people have been insisting that the American military were turning a blind eye and ignoring widespread and systematic torture by the Iraqi security forces on their own people. The proof that this torture was being ignored comes from the US military's own leaked records.
All right, there you have it, and it goes on. Now, Chavala Madlena is joining us from The Guardian. Chavala, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hi, Cenk. How are you?
Good, good. So first, tell me what The Guardian did here. How did you look through the documents, and what did you put together?
Well, just like the Afghanistan documents a couple of months ago, I mean, this all came from one source, which is the legend of Bradley Manning. And obviously it was an agreement between New York Times, The Guardian, Der Spiegel, and, you know, it takes that many journalists to kind of pull and pour over all this information. It was just reams and reams of logs, as well as video and other secret documents. And we've had our investigative team kind of pouring over this and mining it. I mean, it's hard not to get caught up in it, because when you're reading these logs, it's just one entry and it's not really connected to anything, but the description of kind of the graphic torture and just the impunity, it's hard to get through, not just because it's difficult to read, but just because there's so much of it. And, you know, you just think of all these unreported stories there. And so it obviously took our team a while to kind of put together the graphics. You know, we've got an interactive map where you can see each death that wasn't accounted for before kind of mapped out in Baghdad, and the date and what happened, to try and kind of give a true, transparent account of what actually happened in Iraq. And then Guardian Films decided, you know, there's definitely a visual story here, and so we decided to make a film out of it. And we're still mining the logs still, and we're going to drop another film in about 2 weeks.
All right, and the two that I watched, for example, one was about the torture, and then the other one was about the civilian casualties. On the torture issue, there was a point made in the middle there that, hey, weren't we getting rid of Saddam Hussein partly because he tortured his own people, and how did we turn a blind eye to Iraqi authorities doing very similar tactics?
Well, you know, it's actually massively, it's even more disheartening than that, because it goes so much kind of broader and deeper than that. On the one hand, you have, you know, we've got reports of good soldiers in the logs reporting that they witnessed torture. We've got one guy who's coming in with another captain. They do a spot raid on a Iraqi police station in Baghdad, and they hear moaning and screaming when they come in, and the guy screaming Allah, Allah, like in pain. And they come in, there's a grown man sobbing in the middle of the room, and there's kind of electrodes and stuff, and just really horrific medieval-style torture happening. And they're reporting it, but you can see in the logs, you know, Frago 242, which stands for Fragmentary Order, 242, which basically kind of makes it official, just this is not going to be investigated further. They have, you know, these Iraqi forces that we're in bed with, they have carte blanche to do whatever they need. And we have plenty of documentation to show that people very high up, like at the highest level, knew that this was going on.
So, Frago 242 is interesting because, you know, some of the stuff that was done to the prisoners is horrific. And of course, if you torture people, eventually they confess whether they actually did it or they didn't do it. So God knows how many innocent people were tortured. Sometimes they cut off their fingers. I mean, and sometimes there was acid. It goes on and on, right?
I mean, what's in? Yeah, sorry.
But Frago 242 is interesting to me because that means there's a term for it. That means somebody made a decision within the United States Armed Forces that we were going to willfully turn a blind eye to this. So tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, what exactly does that mean?
I mean, it essentially means that it was kind of, where we know it was most endemic is in places like Samara, where a particular kind of strategy was put in place. And we're still kind of putting this picture together, but from what we can gather, the same kind of people that were brought in, you know, these are guys all the way back from the 80s in Central and South America who, you know, formed right-wing death squads covertly. They kind of decided to kind of openly use the Salvador option back in Iraq, back in the very beginning days. And it was kind of a recognition and a nod that Iraqi forces were going to be using extreme methods of violence and extreme torture. And there was kind of a policy, probably the higher up you were, the more comfortable and the more you okayed this. Whereas, you know, you see these soldiers kind of, you know, just ordinary servicemen trying to report it like good soldiers. And, you know, it goes nowhere because this order was put into place because they decided at some point when they realized that counterinsurgency was going to mean working with ex-Baathists that had axes to grind, who use extremely violent methods. And not only were we kind of allowing that, we were working very actively with them.
Chavala, I saw a mention of the Wolf Brigade in there. What's the Wolf Brigade?
The Wolf Brigade is exactly like it sounds. Nasty, hard men. I mean, one particular thing that you know, the Iraqi Special Commandos, that was what the Wolf Brigade was part of. There were several other brigades. There was the Lion Brigade. There was all sorts of different, you know, demonic-sounding names. But, you know, they even invented something like, I think it was a TV show called Terrorism in the Grip of Justice, where it was basically televised confessions by so-called insurgents and criminals. And you could see they would have black eyes, swollen faces. They'd be visibly shaking in fear. And this is on an American-funded TV station, Al Iraqiyya.
Jeez. All right, now if that weren't bad enough, then we had the civilian deaths. So
right.
What more did we find out about the number of deaths and how much of them were civilians?
Well, I mean, I think we all remember General Tommy Franks saying we don't do body counts. But we did do body counts, and it was 15,000 people more. I mean, that's people just kind of, you can throw that number away, but really that's a huge number of people. And those are just the ones that, you know, soldiers recorded in the logs. I mean, they were thorough about it, but you know that that's an underestimate. At the end of the day, that's just, you know, that's just what we record, and that's 15,000 extra deaths. I mean, that's a huge number to kind of just let slip through the net. Those are people's lives.
And here's one of the things I learned from the Guardian videos, the breakdown of the number of deaths, because there's 109,000 recorded deaths between 2004 and 2009 in Iraq. 15,000 are Iraqi troops, okay, and security forces. 23,000 are insurgents. But the largest number by far is 66,000 civilian deaths. And you know, and we had said that, as you said, that we don't keep track of that. It turns out, shockingly enough, the U.S. Armed Forces were lying. They were keeping track of it all along.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's a minimum number because there's so many that were killed that we don't know about.
Right, and the reason I'm skeptical about that is because if you look like at detailed incidents, for example, the notorious incident where the Apache, you know, Crazy Horse 18 shot at what they thought were insurgents, and, you know, they were saying, let me shoot, and ended up killing a Reuters cameraman, a fixer, just an ordinary civilian, and 2 kids that were inside the van that tried to pick them up. You look back at the log of that incident, and they're all kind of categorized as enemy murder, or enemy killed, enemy combatant. And, I mean, just because the person was shot in combat mistakenly does not make them not a civilian death. That's why I'm skeptical.
Absolutely. We're talking to Chavala Madlena from The Guardian. Chavala, final thing for you. But look, you know, we've got this 66,000, which is such a high number. It's hard to wrap your mind around it. Over 20 times the size of 9/11. 66,000 at least innocent civilians killed in this war. But it's okay because they're collateral damage because we had to get Saddam Hussein out because Saddam Hussein would torture some of his prisoners.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, yeah.
Isn't that the final irony as we find out all those deaths and it turns out the government we've propped up does the same exact thing, or at least certainly very similar things, as we turn a blind eye to it.
I know. I mean, it's kind of a sick joke that we thought it would be a good idea, you know, when it wasn't going well, when the war wasn't going well, to use a strategy that we used in South America of death squads using ex-Baathists. And that's going to be our legacy. Our legacy, you know, we didn't find weapons of mass destruction. It was supposed to be bringing human rights and democracy, and this has ended up being our legacy.
All right, Chavala Madlena from The Guardian. Very interesting stories coming out of these WikiLeaks that The Guardian is documenting. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thanks, Jenks.
All right. By the way, more foreign policy for you. You know, of course, over the weekend, actually, while I was in mid-flight, this happened. We found cargo containers with sophisticated explosives coming from what appears to be the Al-Qaeda branch in Yemen. And I've read more up on that today, and the experts in the field are very concerned because the bombs were quite sophisticated. And luckily we had a tip on it, and without the tip we would have been in a lot of trouble there. And they're worried about the growing sophistication of Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Here's another worry, that Al-Qaeda is in Yemen. There's a news report out now saying from Time magazine that some of the top leadership of Al-Qaeda might have already moved from Pakistan. Remember, they initially moved from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and now might have moved from Pakistan to Yemen. And if you thought it was hard getting them in Pakistan, wait till you get a load of Yemen. Because in Yemen, everyone is armed. The NRA would love Yemen. And they often take their weapons with them. Not often, almost always. Well, to say almost always is, of course, an exaggeration, but often, okay? Depends on which part of Yemen you're from and where you're going. And they have even more tribal allegiance. And so it's very, very hard to break that tribal allegiance and have them turn people in or anything like that to work with the authorities or the Americans. They don't seem quite inclined to do that to begin with. So, as that spreads, and as that poison of Al-Qaeda that we did not snuff out in in Afghanistan initially, because when we had Osama bin Laden cornered in Tora Bora, Rumsfeld sent 36 soldiers after him. When they asked him, hey, can we send in 5,000 more Americans that are in the area? He said no. That has then spread to Pakistan and now to Yemen. And luckily, though, don't worry, in the meanwhile, we attacked Iraq. All those civilians died, and now the new idea is to attack Iran. What that has to do with Al-Qaeda, no one knows and no one cares. Because the people in power don't give a damn about you. They just got their own motives. Young Turks.